you think of things to say about the individual that we're honouring tonight, basically, and acknowledging, he is one of the most heard musicians in Australian music history by virtue of his, not just his live work, but also the session work and the sheer body of work in terms of albums, documentaries, films, you know, soundtracks and things like that. He's certainly, I think, probably the most heard drummer that we've ever had the pleasure of listening to in Australia. Would you please welcome Mark Kennedy?
Thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Well, mate, greetings and thanks for joining us.
Well,
thanks
it's quite an honour. Yeah, very pleased to be asked to be part of ACETA. It's
yeah, thank you.
A wonderful organisation.
Yeah, and I realise in researching, everybody knows you, but there's not a lot of knowledge of your body of work, you know, in terms of what you've done and the impact of such acts such as Ayers Rock. It's barely known in Australia. The name is widely known, but what you actually achieved. So where did it all start? Could you talk to us about what inspired you to be a musician and a drummer in particular?
I was always interested in music. The drums fascinated me from school days. The headmaster would call everybody together every morning and he'd say whatever he had to say, and then the drum squad would march the kids into school.
Right.
From like the very first was fascinated with the drums, you know. I made it my aim in primary school to be a member of the drum corps.
Primary school?
Yeah, right. And you weren't allowed to until you be in it until you're in 5th grade. But it turned out that no one could actually play. They were terrible, and they were only being in the drum squad so they could get out of a maths class or a science class or whatever. So I ended up being captain of the drumming squad in 5th grade, whereas I actually was supposed to actually be in it until I was in 6th grade, but no one else could really play. So I got the job.
Okay, and so where did you progress from there?
To the Brighton Municipal Brass Band.
Right.
Marching down the street with the red stripe down the pants.
Okay.
The whole bit, yeah.
Okay. Interesting that a lot of people, including myself, started off as a musician in a brass band.
Yeah, well, it's your first time that you've got to actually get a chart put in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, for some of these traditional pieces that have to be played a certain way.
And then you went on to the Conservatorium of Music.
Yeah, well, what happened was, excuse me, my grandfather led the band just before the war, World War II, at the Palais. He had an 80-piece band on big nights there. When my mother realised that there was no talking me out of playing the drums, she took me around to meet the drummer from my grandfather's band, who was a real little old guy with blankets on the window, and it was all looked very seedy. And he said, oh yeah, well, if he wants to play the drums, he's got to learn a melody instrument. Piano's the one, that'll help him because he can play marimba and xylophone as well off that. That was it. I had to then go and learn the piano. Until such time as at the conservatorium I got through grade 1 and I said, okay, there, I've done it. Now can I play the drums? So from that point on, the piano sort of went to one side. Although I have to say, that really helped me in production in latter years, because I could go to the piano and say, no, that's your note, that's the 3rd, that's the 5th, you know. And so if I had to play piano, I'd have to go and woodshed for 2 years, I think, because I'd be so rusty on it. But you know, it was a great grounding, you know, and it also allowed me to have an understanding what everybody else was doing in the band, you know. It was like I had an idea of form, melody, composition, you know, arrangement and everything through that. So it was invaluable.
So having, you know, developed chops via education, then obviously at some point you moved into band work.
Well, there was one other thing that was very important. I had an old friend at school who eventually, it came around that someone had thrown a case in the front yard of another friend, and it had a snare drum in it. He didn't know where it came from. No one knew where. They tried to find out the owner, couldn't do it. Anyway, cut a long story short, he eventually ran into a chap who said, "Oh, look, yeah, I'm selling my kit. It's a lovely old Ludwig kit I got in America, and but the snare drum's missing." Well, of course, the penny dropped, and he said, "Oh, I think I know who's got your snare drum." He called to me and said, "Look, I think, and I said, "Okay, well, tell him to come round and get it." He came round, I showed him, he said, "Yeah, well, that's my drum." And I said, "Well, I just bought it off this guy for $30 or whatever." And he said, "Well, go back to that guy, get your money back, and, I won't take the snare drum till he gives you your money back." So I went round, I explained it. He said, "Oh, here's your money back." And I said, "Well, here's your drum." And he said, "Oh, well, that's no good because you've got $30, but you haven't got a snare drum now." He said, "So I'll take you out." He took me and bought a snare drum, and then came round every Tuesday for 2 years at 4 o'clock. And he taught me all the rudiments, taught me independence and grounding on the drum kit per se. It really came from that period with him, and from there, he basically said to me, "I'll give you the keys, but you've got to open the doors yourself," which I think was one of the best things I ever heard,
Yeah. Wow,
So,
okay.
yeah, it was good.
I think the first known band you were in was Spectrum.
Yeah, well, there was a couple of little things before that. Bill Putt was in a band. He used to play guitar before he switched to bass in Spectrum, but that eventually became Spectrum, and from there we started recording. From that, all of a sudden I would get calls, "Can you come and play on my record?" So that's when the studio started. So they both sort of, from the first band there and the first record, all of a sudden I was playing in bands, but I was also making records with other people, Hans Pulse.
And this is about 1969.
69, 70, yeah.
And Spectrum, so I think everybody, all the musicians in the crowd here would remember that drum groove.
Yeah, well,
I'll Be Gone.
Yeah, it was not the original take. The actual original one was just horrible. And then we had a rethink about it and came up with that version that everybody knows. So.
Right. So therefore, you weren't with Spectrum long. That I'll Be Gone came out, and then, then what happened then?
Well, I'd started working with Duncan Maguire, which was a long relationship through several bands with Leo De Castro, and then the second formation of Doug Parkinson in Focus. And then we've basically started doing a lot of sessions for different people, the gigs at night, but then sessions during the day, And from there it grew. So it ran side by side. I'd be doing whatever band it was, but we would always be doing recordings as well for other people.
So the bands were Leo De Castro and Friends?
Yeah, Doug Parkinson in Focus.
Yeah.
And then we started another thing with Leo De Castro for a little while. And then basically Duncan and I went into the studio again, and that's when we ran into Tommy Emmanuel, and all of that formation of the stuff with Doug happened.
Right, so they're some pretty good bands.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So I guess that brings us up to Ayers Rock and how that came to be.
Yeah, well, they were all studio players. We got to the stage working over at both Armstrong's but mainly TCS with John French, and we were just making records every day, and we kind of got bored with the fact that we really didn't even know who we were making these records for. It was just we'd become like studio sausages. We just churn it out and have no real idea. And you started to feel like everything you did was there, and behind the glass was the judge and jury. Yeah. There was no bounce back at all. It was just, okay, yeah, do it again. Yeah, that's great. So here's your invoice. Boom, see you later. And that goes on for so long, but you kind of lose touch with the actual people that you're making these records for.
Yeah.
So we all decided, well, let's just put a band together and go out and get some gigs and play just for the hell of it, just to play something different other than what you're allotted within this session or within this, situation. So that's how that started. I mean, the gigs were great, and it actually went a lot further than we ever really intended. It was just more like a hobby thing at first, as a release from the studio confines, And it went on to do other things. In the meantime, we were all doing individual sessions, but then people would start to book the whole band to do. Like Doug, we did one for Doug Parkinson, we did something for, I think, Marsha Hines, and all sorts of different artists. But that whole thing came out of a bunch of studio guys bored with being in a studio.
And then you grew to become an extraordinary force in Australian music, particularly festivals.
Yeah.
And, and one of the couple of bands, we can think of Crossfire and Pyramid.
Yeah.
And Ayers Rock, just
that was
an incredible period.
It was a great era in music here. I mean, in the end, that led us to go to Los Angeles and record at the record plant with string sections, and a lot of the guys we met there we didn't know at the time, but they were all from the Wrecking Crew. They were playing on all these records, and we were very fortunate that Cole Lachlan, the sax player, was studying with Nelson Riddle, and Nelson Riddle gave him the magic phone number, and we got all these players in, and the engineers at the record plant saying, "How did you get these guys? You've only been here 3 weeks. We've been here all our life. We can't get these guys." But it was that magic phone number from the guy was Edgar Lustgarten, a cellist, but he knew all the Hollywood string players, and we got them. So it was.
But prior to that, you made that wonderful album, your first album.
Yeah.
Which was basically live, wasn't it?
It was all live, yeah.
You just played live?
We went to festival and recorded a track. We went in and listened to it and thought, no, that's nothing like us. Packed up and left. Came back to Melbourne and set up at the old Armstrongs there. And we just thought, okay, well, we're more of a live band, so let's just not mess around with it. Let's just get an audience in. So we figured, okay, if we do 2 shows a night for 2 nights, we've got 4 takes of everything. That'll be fine. That's the album. So we managed to make the whole thing from the beginning to the end for $8,000. And that took us to America. But it was the way it was done, because we'd do the first show, we'd review the tapes, go back in, any changes we wanted to make, the second show, boom. Yeah, we got a couple of good ones from last night, let's fix, and so by the end of the 2 nights, we had 4 takes of everything, we had the bounce back from the audience. We had to sort of make sure they didn't make noises and stuff until the end, but,
And you had a great album called Big...
We got a good album out of it, yeah.
Called Big Red Rock. And it still sells today, and it's available.
Yes, yeah. I think, well, Gil Matthews did through his, I forget the name of the label, I think it's Aztec Music or something.
Aztec Music.
Yeah, well, he did a reboot of it, so it's on CD and out, yeah.
So there's a pretty good story about how you hooked up with Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, isn't there, in terms of your introduction
Well, I mean...
That for the record label was an unexpected turnaround when you were signed.
Yeah, well, what had happened was, at the time, FM radio had just started in America, and all the top 40 stuff went to AM, and FM, they wanted longer tracks in stereo where there wasn't going to be ads or anything like that. So I'm sure Michael Gudinski went there with a pile of albums. He would have had Skyhooks for sure on top of the list and whatever. And Jerry Moss went through them, and Herb Alpert, and they said, no, we'll take these guys.
Ayers Rock.
They would have been shocked. Michael would have been shocked because it was the last thing he would have expected.
Yeah.
So anyway, they took us all around America, and then we came back to LA and made that second album.
And during your time with A&M Records, they sent you out on tour with some pretty phenomenal acts, and you played to some pretty phenomenal crowds too in America.
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing was, there was no internet back then and no mobile phones, so anything that happened in America, it took a couple of years to hit Australia. We went out and opened for Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run album.
Yeah.
No one had ever heard of him here. No one had heard of him in America. That was the big boomph, you know. Yeah. And there'd be like Leonard Skinner, there was, you know, all the bands at the time.
Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Bachman Turner Overdrive. Yeah.
Bob Seger.
Bob Seger, yeah. I mean,
pretty big acts
all of those guys were just, they were sort of known in their local area, but internationally, no. Yeah. And then, like, within 2 years, it all started to hit Australia. And you say, oh, you heard this guy, Bruce Springsteen? Yeah, I've heard him. You know.
That must have been a pretty incredible time, because you got some pretty good experience in the recording thing, but also in the live side of things in America.
Oh, yeah, we played to some huge crowds there. But
35,000, I think, on occasion. There was one.
Oh, yeah, there was 100,000 in Seattle one time, and one in Florida, in Tampa, there was about the same, 100,000 or something like that, yeah.
And were you well received? Were you well received?
We were well received. Artemis Pyle, the drummer from Leonard Skinner, he was a lovely guy. He came and saw us later on in LA when we were recording as well, but we did the show, we opened what they used to call the ice cream spot. In other words, the sun was out, there was no lights, the guys are going around selling ice creams and all that, you know. And we played, and we got a bit of an encore, you know. Oh. There was a big...
Because the ice cream act.
Yeah, as the ice cream act, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the main act wasn't on until 10:30 at night or something. And of course we came off, and there's a big guy there, the promoter, with the cigar blowing smoke in your face and everything. Yeah, good guys, yeah. You know, and Artemis came up and said, hey, hang on a second. Hey, they just got an encore, let them have their encore. And he said, oh no, we're running in time. And Artemis turned around and said, hey, this is our show. If they don't go on, we don't go on. Right. And he went, oh, okay. So we got our encore. Yeah. But Artemis was lovely. He came and he heard the second album, and he said, oh, I practice this stuff at home, but I'd love to be playing it in the band, but, you know, it's not for that band, you know.
No.
So, yeah.
Well, what an achievement, I think you'll agree. So you actually left Ayers Rock?
Yeah. It was... It was going in a direction that I just kind of didn't feel part of anymore. And because it was so improvised, we would start off with a score. We would all learn the score, but we wouldn't play it in that straight context. We'd all improvise around it, knowing that that was there, but not actually completely stating it so that it just put it in that realm, which is great. I mean, and you know, 9 times out of 10, it works. When it flipped over to only being about 4 out of 10, I thought, something needs to change, and it wasn't going to, so I changed.
I think you came back to Australia from America and joined Marcia Hines.
That's correct, yeah. Well, I'd actually done a session for her before I left. I was packed up, ready to go to America, and Robbie Porter called me and said, can you come and do a session? I said, oh, mate, I'm all packed up, all the drums are crated up and everything. He said, well, unpack them. So I went in and did a few tracks for that album, and so I'd met her and I'd done some tracks on her first album. When I came back, they approached me and said, you know, can you come and do it? You know, so I ended up working with her.
And there is also a story about you and one of her biggest hits.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, so Robbie Porter, the producer, had discarded Without You.
Yeah, well, look, the thing is...
And you argued the toss, apparently, rumour has it, from people who were there, and said you wouldn't give up.
And ended up being the only #1 record she ever had. But
yeah.
What would happen in those days is you'd go to for a solo singer, you'd go to a publishing company and look for songs. And he would come over from America with a whole bunch of stuff, you know. So we'd just go through and see what worked.
And you spotted that and said, this will be a hit. This is for Marcia.
Yeah.
And I think weren't the band in the room, or everybody was sort of there, or was it?
No, this was us, just Robbie and Marcia and I going through these demo tapes from publishing companies. Yeah.
Right. Well, you must have had quite a power of persuasion. Tenacity.
Yeah, I think they just maybe needed another opinion, or
Right.
you know.
Isn't it sort of interesting, as an aside, disco often gets a poor rap these days, but some of that disco stuff was fabulous.
Well, yeah,
Some of the playing, you know.
It's never really gone away.
No.
You know, I listen to stuff now, and you know, even the stuff young guys are doing, it's still four to the floor a lot of the time. You know, especially the dance stuff. It's just like, you know, it's all the same BPM.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the same approach. They might put different window dressing there, but it's, you know, the foundation of it's pretty much the same.
And now, a different string to your bow in this particular period of time. It's on the record that you actually designed Marcia's stage costumes. And
I went to art school, and it was always something I did. You know, if someone needed if we needed a poster for something, I'd throw something together or whatever. And it came to a point where they wanted to do a bigger show, and I said, "Oh well, you know, why don't we do this?" And I did some sketches, and they said, "Oh, that's going to work." Blah 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 blah. And then it just came down to lighting, how that was going to work, and then 10-piece band. Okay, you know, they could turn up in thongs and, you know, board shorts. So get a band uniform, and so I did 20 designs, and every guy in the band could pick any two. So the idea of having two was that they turned up clean.
right.
You know, not like they've been crawling through the mud all night, which some of them had.
No.
It was, and some costumes for her. One of her costumes I did is in the Powerhouse Museum.
In Sydney?
Yeah, in Sydney.
Right.
And, you know, it was just something, someone had to do it. And I was there and I did it. You know, it wasn't anything other than an unfolding situation, you know. It wasn't a planned thing at all.
Just before this period of time, I'm not sure that our guests would know this, but I remember in the early 70s working at Brash's, and we owned Allen's, a big publisher, but I remember drummers coming into the department and, you know, constantly talking about a particular tutorial, and it was written by you. Studies in Rock, Mark Kennedy, version 1, version 2. This was very widely used back in the day, and we had a music school, a big one, called the Melbourne Music Centre. Loads of teachers and students, and this was the book they used.
Yeah, well, it was a guy, Mel Jacobs, who had Drum World, approached me and said that we've got plenty of beginner books and we've got plenty of advanced books, but there's nothing in the middle for guys who are just out there playing, you know, simple stuff. And can you do it? And I said, oh, okay, whack. And so that's how it turned out. But it was definitely a targeted thing. And the price was targeted. It was $1.50. I made a fortune out of that. Yeah, right.
And how long did it take to write?
Oh, I would do it between tours.
Oh, right.
Doing it at home, I just put a bit together. I'd be in a hotel and I'd have an idea. I'd scribble that down and then put it into the book as I got back. You know.
Right, right. So moving along, was it just transitional, or did you actually leave the Marcia Hines band?
It was. I did about 5 albums with Marcia and
A few tours, I would imagine.
Yeah, tours, and it just, you know, one thing leads on to another. I think after that, I started working with Duncan Maguire in the studio over at Cole Joy's studio, and we'd produced quite a few things together. And then Doug Parkinson came in one day and wanted to do some demos, and we sort of did some demos and listened to it and thought, oh, you know what, we should put a band together out of this, which is what happened. The original guitar player who did the demos couldn't do it, and then we found this little guy in a jazz club, I think the Bourbon and Beef it was, in the King's Cross, playing like light jazz, you know, and it was Tommy Emmanuel.
Right.
And Doug had found him and said, I found this guitar player, he's really good, you know. Oh, okay. So we said, can you come over for a rehearsal? So Tommy turns up, he's got this little amp. We play the song and it's great. We said, oh, it's really good. And we finished the song and Tommy unplugs his guitar and stands up and says, I can't do this. I went, oh, what's wrong? He said, oh, it's too loud, I'll blow my amp up. We said, we'll buy you a bigger one. We bought him a bigger one. Within 3 months, we're going, Tommy, turn down. You know, we unleashed a monster. You
know. What a monster, hey?
Yeah.
And so what was that? That was then a reformation of the Doug Parkinson In Focus band?
That was called Southern Star Band.
Southern Star Band, yeah.
And then again, my art kicked in there because Cole Joy said, oh, we'll do it through festival and we'll do it on your label, the subsidiary label. So we needed the label for the middle of the record. So I designed that.
Did you?
Yeah, of course.
And then there was Men at Work?
Yeah, well, that was a session. That was on the back of doing a Mental as Anything album, doing all the percussion on that. And he said, oh, can you come to Melbourne? I went to Melbourne, came to I was living in Sydney at the time, came down to Melbourne, did the tracks, and then went back to Sydney. And 6 months later, I got a call. I said, remember those tracks you did? Yeah. Do you want to come to Europe? And so we went to Paris, Switzerland, France, Switzerland, England, and Holland. And I just mimed the stuff that we'd already done. But yeah, I mean, there was good players. There was James Black on keyboards.
Yeah.
So it was a good session. It was a memorable session.
And of course, at this particular period of time, whilst you were doing a solid amount of session work, you also joined the Renee Gayer Band. Yeah.
And that, there's a book there.
Yeah. And there's some questions there too, but I won't ask them.
Yeah. Look, you know, I decided long ago not to write the book because I'd never get out of court.
No. No. But anyway, beside the point, she was a great singer.
Oh, look, she was like, you know, she was hard to, herself, she, you know, difficult woman. Paul Curley was about her, and she loved it because she said it summed her up. But she was difficult to, but I would sit there some nights almost thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing here? And then she'd sing something and I'd think, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had your moments, but I guess it was
But we were good friends, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I got on very well with her.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of other people.
No. But I guess it was a good band too.
Oh, yeah. It was always a good band. There was always good players.
Yeah.
You know, most guys, if they could stand the heat,
Yeah.
to put it mildly, would be regulars. But every now and then, you know, someone would, for whatever reason, either themselves going, I can't take this anymore, or she would go, well, you're fired. You know, you never knew what was going to happen. So, but that was part of the interesting thing about it, because the difference between her and some of the other people, it was kind of like, it was like some of a conglomeration of all their egos and personalities on steroids with her, you know?
Yeah.
And so I got the book for The Long Way to the Top, because Michael Chugg said to me, "You've worked with Renee for 15 years. There's a lot of egos on stage. You're the only guy I know that can handle them all." You know? Because, you know, it was stressful, but, you know, that tension that you created made you, you know, perform.
Yeah.
You know, there was no hiding anywhere.
No. And so you said 15 years. You worked with Renee for 15
On and off
years.
for 15 years, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And in any other bands and plenty of session work,
A
I
lot of
suppose?
session work in the meantime, yeah.
Because you were living in Sydney then?
Yeah, yeah. There was all sorts of stuff, you know, like we were having a chat the other day, as how that studio work changed over periods, like from being an all-out call with everybody up there, and then it went to like, okay, we've got all these parts, we used a drum machine, can you come in and put some real drums on it? Or my friend Sunil De Silva, the percussionist up there, we were laughing one day, we said, you know, we realised that we'd played on about 100 tracks together, but never at the same time.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so you start to notice how things are changing. And then I remember I got a call, which I still believe to this day was, which was Spencer Lee. He said, "Can you come over and do some samples for me?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sure," because everyone was now, this was part of it, everyone was using, you know, all that sort of gear. And okay, yeah, I'll come over. And now I realise that it was the samples for the Fairlight 3.
Right.
Because when Duncan and I worked a little bit with the Fairlight, we realised that where they had sampled all these things, there was a real definitive pitch of the room, the ambience of the room. What was exciting about it is, you had 3 octaves of tom-toms. But as you went up, the ambience took on a pitch, which all of a sudden was very ugly about the 2nd octave up on the keyboard. So, you know, meant this, although the idea of it all was fabulous, the samples weren't very good. So, you know, you ended up with all these problems as you tried to develop something. That's why, as it developed, it got better, and because then Synclavier came along and blew it out of the water.
So you were responsible for the Fairlight samples?
Guilty.
Guilty.
As charged.
Oh dear. And so yeah, so we're moving along, and I was going to mention you were the drummer in the house band for Long Way to the Top.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've already expressed that it was, probably an interesting.
It was great because it went from all the old bandstand crew, you know, Little Patty and Cole Joy.
You're talking early 60s. It went from there,
right, and then right up to Ross Wilson.
Yeah.
And Russell Morris and all of the people who were on it.
Right, and that went for a while, didn't it, that tour?
It went, there was a major national tour and then a regional tour.
Oh, okay. That would have been a great band too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was all great players again, you know. I mean, there was quite a change in styles when you went from the 60s up, you know. So you had to be able to adapt and make it sound legit. And so we had to do quite a bit of research listening to the original records. And of course, some of them you'd go, do you really want me to play that? You know, but that's what worked, you know. So.
And in terms of, I remember watching the show and looking at the Atlantics. Did you actually do Bombora, or was Peter Hood still up for it?
They were on the national tour. The regional tour was just the house band with the main guy with the Masters Apprentices. It was just Jim Keys and Doug Ford, and we were there. And so I was a Meteor with Max.
Yeah.
I was a Twilight with Glenn Shorrock. I was an Axiom with, you know. So we did all of them, you know.
Talking about Axiom, I understand you could have been in Axiom. You could have been the drummer.
Yeah. It was actually, Glenn and Brian came and knocked on my, my parents' front door, and my mother sent them away. They wanted me to join Axiom, and my mother said, no, he's got to finish school.
Ooh, right, okay. You obviously must have shifted back to Melbourne at some point around about this time, having been in Sydney for many years.
Yeah, there was a number of reasons for that. At this stage, I'd been playing with Leo Sayer for a few years. And my brother got cancer, and I was coming back and forth, checking, you know, seeing how he was going and all that. He passed away eventually, followed by my father.
Yeah.
And so my mother was in this big house on her own, and I said to Leo, look, I'm going to have to move back, and, you know. Anyway, he said, that's all right, I'll fly you out of Melbourne. So it was no big deal. And Damien, the sound engineer, Damien Young, is also in Melbourne. So it wasn't a big deal. And now we've got the bass player who's all in Melbourne. So half the band live in Sydney, half of them are in Melbourne. We just all catch planes and meet up.
And so Leo Sayer, that's probably your longest stint then. You're still with Leo,
now.
aren't you?
18 years now.
18 years.
Yeah.
And he's obviously a damn fine person and
he's a lovely
employer.
Man. Yeah. He's a good friend, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And still pulls a crowd.
Oh yeah, he's doing really well in the UK as we speak. He's got a tour on there, and he gets back on the 1st of November, and we do shows up in Queensland.
Right, right. When I look at this, this is Mark's body of work. Not necessarily the bands and the acts that he's led or been in. It's quite extraordinary, as I said at the introduction, and I think I could sort of count up 300 albums.
Yeah, yeah, that's what has been released. There's a lot of stuff you do which, you know, you'd never know what happened to it.
No.
So there's like dozens and dozens and dozens of other recording sessions which I never kept track of, you know.
Yeah. So therefore, you probably are the most listened to drummer in Australia.
Oh, look, there's a lot of guys who could probably, you know, wear that hat, you know. But,
there is probably.
But you know, I'm just happy to be one of them.
Yeah, yeah. So who have been, you know, as players, who have been your influences?
Oh, mostly not drummers.
Is that right?
Yeah. I'm more attracted to the music than drummers. I mean, obviously there's drummers that I've admired, or, you know, whatever, or sort of been drawn to a particular artist or whatever because of the drummer in the band. But mostly what I've learnt musically is more from people in the studio.
Yeah.
Great musicians that I've had the opportunity to work with, and I always would do the session, but see, most guys would pack up and leave afterwards. I would sit in the control room until they kicked me out.
Yeah.
You know, and just watch and absorb what was happening, and, you know.
Yeah. And so the future, your playing future, what plans? Continue with Leo and?
Oh yeah, well that's indefinite. I mean, I'm 73. He's 76. So obviously, you know, you can't go on forever.
No.
But he's still got as much energy and singing as well as ever. So, you know.
Yeah. Is he? Are you still playing in the original keys with Leo? And
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we've changed any of the keys.
Right. Okay.
I think there might be one that we may have, but you know, most of it is still in the same keys that he sang them in 35 years, 40 years ago. You know?
Right. So I guess it gets to that time of our time together to help us and help those that'll eventually watch this, and that'll be a lot of young people. And I'm talking about your industry overview and your observations. I mean, I've got one that I want to kick off with, and then I'll throw over to you. Okay. But I have a problem with the way live sound engineers are treating drums and bass. Mm-hmm. And you know, you talk about drums as a whole thing. It's not a bass drum.
Yeah.
You know, it's everything. There's beauty in all elements of it, and the cymbals and stuff like that. But to ramp up the volume on a kick drum and bass, you know, so you obviously are with a good sound guy.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean,
or who understands how to represent you properly. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's just a thing that a lot of front of house guys have got into from the pub thing, you know, where they want to boom, 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 you know, which, you know, in that genre, I guess that's all terrific. However, they don't have the ability to transition into anything else other than that. That becomes like, oh yeah, I do this, I do that, I do this, I do that, you know, and it's all like banging square pegs into round holes for my mind. And everybody has a different sound on their drums, and just to go, oh, this is what I do with the snare drum, this is, you know, bump, and just put all these things on it without actually taking the time to listen to what the drum actually sounds like before you do all that stuff, and you know, producing that sound rather than not reducing it into, you know, the set of presets that they seem to have. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying a lot of engineers, you immediately, the thing you notice about the bass drum is you lose your dynamics straight away, because it's whether you hit it that hard or that hard, it's the same volume. So you've got no dynamic range there, you know. And I have the same thing about limiters and all of that, where everything's squashed into a bandwidth and you've got no light and shade. And half the thing that makes the great drummers stand out is their ability to use dynamics, you know.
It's almost left contemporary
music.
Well,
it's almost cut out of the equation for you if they're going to be all that compressed and limited and, you know, gated and whatever, you know. I mean, it's all has a place, but not as as you know, a starting point. It's not a starting point. The starting point, open the mic, see what you've got. Work with what you got. Don't try and change it into something else. I had a 13-hour session with a guy in Los Angeles who put me through hell. I changed the skins, I changed the tuning, I did everything. And in the end I said, oh, I don't know what you're after. And he said, well, you know, that Frankenstein, you know that song Frankenstein? I said, well, why didn't you tell me that 12 and a half hours ago, and I would have told you that I don't want to do that, you know? And how about we just get my sound, you know, and do my thing here, or, you know. And in the end, I bailed on doing the drum thing, and we'd met Emile Richards, and he took us to his warehouse, and he'd just done stuff with Frank Zappa and George Harrison. He had like a warehouse full of percussion stuff. In fact, he's the one that I'd always played little bits of percussion on stuff, like tambourine or cowbell, some claves as an overdub. But he really turned me on to the possibilities of what you could actually do with percussion, especially tuned percussion and stuff. And so I said, oh man, why don't you just come to the studio, bring a truckload full of shit and we'll do something. And he did. And so together we just put over, you know, layers of stuff on and messed around, but all, you know. So, you know, again, it wasn't a lack of communication on my part. It was the fact that this guy had in his mind what he wanted to get from the session. No regard to actually what we were doing, what it was about. Yeah. I had stand-up arguments with him. And he said, if you tell me what to do, I'll punch you in the mouth. And I said, well, I'm not telling you what to do. You just told me you've never done an album like this before. And I said, and I have. So, you know, he was, we got on all right in the end because I think he wanted to bully us, you know, oh, you silly little Aussies from down on the farm sort of thing, and I wouldn't have it, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, he didn't like it, but I think in the end he respected the fact that I wasn't going to let him get away with just bullying us into doing what he wanted, you know.
And that leads me into another observation. In terms of my research for this episode and talking to people about you, the amount of people, particularly drummers, who said there's only one Mark Kennedy in Australia.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
That is a good thing, because of the high standards you achieve and the grooves you achieve, and the fact that many people say they've just gone to gigs like Ayers Rock and stuff like that just to watch you, you know, just to watch the way you handle things. But the other thing is people talk about how nice your drums always sound.
Yeah, well,
and that's a compliment because not everybody would say that about every.
No, well, I mean, I used to do sessions where I go and tune for well-known acts, In Excess, Choir Boys, Old 55, you name it. It just became one of those things where I knew all the studios, I knew all the engineers, I knew all the producers, and it just became a lot easier for them rather than have a band come in and spend 4 hours trying to get a drum sound. They give me a call and say, can you come in and get the drums going? Well, in an hour, I'd have exactly what they wanted, you know, and they could move on with the session then, you know.
Yeah. How do you feel about music today? How do you feel about playing it? Talking about sessions, which you obviously enjoyed, getting in a room with a whole lot of musicians. Do you miss that?
What I miss is the fact that when I started out, first of all, everyone was in there. There was you all played together. It was like press, record, take, and it was the performance, you know. And now I sort of find that where the arrangement was a concept, it was all laid out, you know. Now it's arrangement, you know, it's almost like a series of happy accidents. You know, it's trial and error. You've got the time, you've got the tracks, and maybe we'll get something in the end, you know. But the whole, on most cases, not I'm saying on all cases, but a lot of stuff is developed, you know, and they don't really know where they're going with it. It's, oh, we'll try this. No, let's have slide guitar. No, let's have fuzz guitar. Let's have clavinet. Let's have Hammond organ. You know what I mean? They're not, it's trial and error. It's like the monkey with the typewriter. You know, eventually they'll type something that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And so I find that's the biggest change, whereas the concept was completely there to start with. It was just a matter of actuating with the musicians. Yeah. Now, you don't have those musicians collectively working on it. Sometimes you do, but most of the time everybody's doing their bit. And they're not even doing it in the same room. They're doing it and sending files, you know? And that's fraught with problems. I've produced stuff where you got a guy, you go, he's really good, we've got to get him to do this stuff. You send him a track and he sends you back 3 versions of it and you can't use any of them. Or he sends you 3 tracks back and you say, oh, you know, that's all right, we'll do a comp of it. But then you realise that he did that one on that guitar, and that one on that guitar, and you can't put them together because it just jumps everywhere. So, you know, and I find that, you know, capable players and everything, but it's very hard to relate to them what you want without being there in person, guiding them through it, you know. And there's so many ways you can approach something. So without direction,
Yeah.
or someone overseeing it and directing traffic, you end up getting a whole lot of stuff you can't use. You've still got to obviously pay the guy for it because he's done the job and he's done it in all the right reasons. And then you've got to tell him, oh, we can't use it. Oh, what's wrong with it? You know, and you get all this, oh God, you know. So
It's a different world, isn't it?
It is, you know. So, I mean, I understand that's the way it is. That's the way it is. It's fine. But as a producer, it's fraught with problems when you're just hoping someone's going to send you something that occasionally it works. I mean, a lot of the times it does. But you know, it's a 50-50 toss of the coin. Am I going to get?
I guess a chart's a very rare thing these days, is it?
Well, a written note-for-note chart is. Everybody just gets a lead sheet. It's a chord sheet. Any accents or stops or whatever are there, and that's it. Everyone gets one. That's what I'm used to. I get the same as what the guitar player, the piano player, bass player gets, you know. And, you know, I mean, the reason the guys are bought in is because they know how to interpret that. And this is just a mud map.
Yeah.
Then you listen to what the instrumentation is and the singer, the form of the song, whatever, and move from there. You know?
Right. Well, I think we're drawing to a close. I hope. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed the hour together that we've had. And I guess there's nothing more to say than would you please acknowledge and honour and thank Mark.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you.